Hello, BookTube, my old friend. I've come to tag with you again. This is the Sound of May tag. It's a series of questions all about music, and it was created by Caden Connolly to tie in with his reading event, The Sound of May, which is co-hosted by Steve Donahue. The Sound of May is a reading event all about reading books related to music. I don't know if I'm going to have time to fit that in this month, but I really did want to fit in the tag because there's a lot of really interesting music-related questions here, and being a musician as well as a booktuber, I feel like I have quite a lot to say. So, strap in. I've been tagged a few times in this by James from Quaint and Curious Volumes, Gareth from Books, Songs and Other Magic, and Alan from Big Hard Books and Classics. So I'll put links to all of their versions in the description as well, because they all had really interesting stuff to say as well. So question 1 is, what are your earliest memories of music in your life? Did you have any favourite songs or musicians as a child? Is there one musical memory from your childhood or adolescence that sticks out in your mind? Well, I'll leave adolescence for later. I kind of feel like my musical childhood and my adolescence were two distinct phases, if you will. So I'm going to stick to just childhood for this question. And yeah, music has really been in my life as long as I can remember. My parents both loved music as well when I was growing up. They had a stack of records and CDs as well. I think the records were mostly mum's and the CDs were dad's. And whenever we went anywhere in the car, the radio would be on, usually playing music. My parents both played musical instruments as well, not professionally and not frequently. In fact, for Dad, I think he hadn't played music since his teens, really. But he did play bass in some bands in school, and I think he played cornet as well. And my mum had an electric keyboard, which she bought, I think, when my older brother started going to school and she needed something to occupy her suddenly empty days. So there was a lot of music in the house, and a lot of my kind of extended family are very musical as well. I have an uncle who was a music teacher, and most of my cousins play some kind of instrument. So yeah, you kind of couldn't really get away from music. Not that I wanted to get away from music, because I always loved it. And this isn't exactly a memory because I don't remember it, but my parents say that they heard me singing before they heard me speaking. So I think the first thing they ever heard me singing was Hip to Be Square by Huey Lewis and the News when it was on the radio, which probably places my age quite accurately. But yeah, I also remember, that stack of records that my parents had. There were things like, there was a record of Disney songs in there that I remember frequently asking to listen to. The record player was slightly too high for me to reach it and put the record on myself, so Mum would put it on for me. But there were all the Disney songs up to, I think, the mid-70s probably in there. So all of the stuff you would expect, like When You Wish Upon a Star and Hi Ho, and the Winnie the Pooh tunes, the wonderful thing about Tiggers is Tiggers are wonderful things. And a bit later than that, I remember we would, especially like in on car journeys with Mum, she had a few cassettes that got played a lot. So there was Beatles live at the BBC, and also an album of Cole Porter songs. So yeah, a lot of Beatles, a lot of show tunes, that probably kind of had quite a big influence on me. Question 2 is, were you ever or are you currently in any music program, choir, orchestra, band, theatre? Do you play any instruments or sing recreationally? Yes to most of these things. So this is going to be, I think, a particularly long answer, because I'm going to go through all of it. So the first instrument I ever learned to play was the tenor horn. I had lessons for a year. I can't remember exactly what age I was, maybe 7 or 8. And I enjoyed that, but I never really got great at it. But, I remember kind of getting my teacher to show me how to play the theme tune from Star Wars, and Home on the Range. I don't know why I liked Home on the Range. Like, I have no connection to that song at all. But I must have heard it somewhere. I think possibly in a Disney film at some point. And yeah, it stuck in my mind, and so I learned how to play it, weirdly. Then, a little bit later, I started to learn keyboard. I didn't have lessons for that. In fact, everything else I'm self-taught at. But, I started keyboard, I guess I would have been 8 or 9. And my uncle, who is a retired music teacher, he taught me the basics of what a chord is and how to build one, and the difference between major and minor and that sort of thing. But I just kind of took that and ran with it, and mostly taught myself by ear. So fairly rudimentary keyboard skills, but not bad for a 9-year-old, I guess. And that's, I think, where I first started also trying to write some songs. I remember writing like at least a few songs on keyboard that I can still remember bits of. I wouldn't say they were great, but again, not bad for a 9-year-old. Then a little bit later still, I guess I was 11, my older brother started to teach me the basics of guitar. He was a big Radiohead fan at the time. He still is a big Radiohead fan. But he would teach me bits of Radiohead songs so that we could play them together. He would play like the rhythm guitar and sing, and I would add in a bit of extra guitar, and that was really fun. And again, I kind of took that basic information and really ran with it. And I think that's where I started to kind of get serious about music. I bought my own guitar with savings when I was 12, which was a semi-acoustic Tanglewood, like a blue front, and yeah, I really kind of threw myself into learning guitar again, self-taught, and around that time I was getting into Radiohead myself, and also Smashing Pumpkins, again via my brother, and then also Jeff Buckley, and bands like Eels, and I learned a lot of their songs on guitar, mostly by ear. I had a few tab books as well. I can kind of read like music notation, but not fluently. So I can't really translate music notation to guitar, but I learnt guitar tabs and learnt stuff like Radiohead, Smashing Pumpkins, and Jeff Buckley. So that was really how I learned not only how to play guitar but how to write songs. And then in secondary school, I joined my first band. Started out with three of us. Was me on guitar and vocals, and then another guitarist and a bassist. We were joined by a third guitarist and a drummer as well slightly later. But our very first public performance was in the school hall. We played a cover of Just by Radiohead. And this was before we had the drummer or the third guitarist, so it was just the three of us. And I remember that that song, if you're familiar with it, has quite a few kind of abrupt pauses, and then it keeps going again. And at each one of those pauses, my classmates in the audience clearly didn't know the song and didn't realise that it hadn't finished. So they kept starting to clap, and then we would keep playing, which then was extra awkward because when we reached the actual end, which also ends quite abruptly, they assumed, oh, this is another pause. So it took a little while for the applause to actually properly start. So yeah, interesting public debut on guitar, but it was fun. And we kept making music together through secondary school and sixth form until people started moving away to university. And yeah, in my late teens, I also started to make solo music, writing it and recording it on my home computer, which is something that I've continued to do to a much more proficient level now than I did then. But I still have some of those early solo recordings and some of the demos from my old band, which is fun to listen back and see kind of where I started and how far I've come. But yeah, I've been doing that for years and years. I'm currently on a hiatus from making music for health reasons, but my most recent solo album was released in 2022. It's called Star Stuff. I've also released like a solo EP as well, and before that, kind of mid 20-teens, also released an album and an EP with a band called Prentice. So yeah, I've been doing music for a long time. It's kind of my main thing, really. Question 3 is there any album that you consider musically perfect or near perfect? This can include popular music, symphonies, Broadway musicals / film scores, etc. Well, I love a lot of music. I love a lot of albums all the way through, and if that's the definition of perfect, then it's very hard to narrow it down. So I'm going to force myself to narrow it down to 3, and I'm going to pick 3 from different genres. So my first pick is going to be a rock album, and it's Pony Express Record by Shudder to Think. This is an album from 1994, and Shudder to Think were, or rather are, because they've got back together again, but they started in the kind of Washington, D.C. punk, post-punk, post-hardcore scene, along with bands like Fugazi and Jawbox. But Shudder to Think have slightly more of a glam rock sound to them. The singer Craig Wedren has an almost operatic voice. If you're a fan of Jeff Buckley or Freddie Mercury, perhaps, then the sound of his voice might appeal to you. He can hit some high notes and he can really belt. But musically, they don't really sound anything like Queen because their music is often very angular and dissonant and weird. And this, I think, will become a theme through quite a lot of the music I'm going to be talking about. That's kind of home base for me. I love some weird, crunchy, dissonant, weird, noisy music. So Pony Express record is, I think, Shudder to Think's best album. And yeah, I love it all the way through. The production's great. It's like beautifully recorded, brilliantly performed. And yeah, every song is delightfully weird and dissonant and strange in its own unique way. So it took me a few listens to really get into it, but once it clicked, yeah, it never fails. I adore that album. Another style of music that's really important to me is jazz, and for a perfect jazz album, I'm going to pick Out to Lunch by Eric Dolphy from 1964. This is an avant-garde jazz album, so again, we're looking at weird, angular, dissonant stuff. And yeah, again, it took a little while for it to click, but once it did, it never fails to thrill me. Eric Dolphy was known for having a very unique style on multiple instruments. He played saxophone, flute, and also bass clarinet. And I particularly love his bass clarinet sound, which, you know, it may be a bass clarinet, but he could hit some crazy screechy high notes on that thing. But, you know, it's also got this kind of rich, woody tone to it that I think is beautiful, even when he's playing resolutely non-beautiful things on it. And yeah, I just think that album is amazing. I mean, it's called Out to Lunch, and it sounds out to lunch, but also just the musicians sound so together. You know, it may be far out, but they're going far out together, and I find it really inspiring. And for a classical piece, I'm going to say La Mer by Claude Debussy. So this is a piece in 3 movements, and you know, Debussy was considered to be part of the Impressionist movement. I don't think he considered himself to be an Impressionist, but that's kind of historically how he's described. And I think La Mer is incredibly evocative of the sea. I've actually heard it performed live at the Royal Albert Hall as part of the Proms. And it was an incredible experience. But even hearing it on, you know, a recorded version is still, yeah, it gets to me. Especially, I think the end, the crescendo of the first movement. There's a moment there that it really kind of overwhelms me, and it really kind of gives me full body chills. So yeah, I really, really love that piece. I love Debussy in general. And, you know, I'm listening to more classical music at the moment than I used to. But yeah, Debussy, I think, has a particular special place for me, and La Mer is probably my favourite work of his. Okay, I lied. I have a fourth. And and that is Rock Bottom by Robert Wyatt from 1974. And I particularly wanted to bring up Robert Wyatt because another reading event that's happening this month is the Disability Readathon. I'll tag the hosts and link to the website in the description if you want to know more about that. But Robert Wyatt is my favourite disabled musician, and being a disabled musician myself, that means a lot to me. And Rock Bottom is an album that he wrote while in hospital, recuperating from the accident that left him disabled. So it's a really meaningful album. That said, in the lyrics, he doesn't really talk about that at all. But I find it just a really beautiful album. Again, I love it all the way through. I particularly recommend the first track, Sea Song. If you don't like Sea Song, then you're probably not going to like the rest of it. But I think it's an amazing, amazing album. Question 4 is, who are some musicians that you wish people knew more about? It can be from any genre. You are limited to 3. For each one you list, attach a piece/song to them. So I'm going to take a leaf out of James's book here and mention 3 musicians that are friends of mine. So first, I'm going to mention Ruth Goller. She is an amazing bassist, and she played bass in Bug Prentice, my band. So she has since gone on to do some solo albums, and they're really amazing, beautiful, atmospheric, strange albums. I really recommend them. She plays bass in really unique ways, and sings really beautifully and delicately. It's kind of ghostly, I think, perhaps. Just amazing. So I think you should definitely check out Ruth Goller's solo albums. And another bandmate of mine is Stephen Gilchrist, who makes solo albums under the name Stephen Evans. He was the drummer in Bug Prentice. He's now made 4 albums as Stephen Evans, and again, I love them. Kind of indie rock. The lyrics are very very funny. You can sometimes be quite blunt, but in a very funny way. And yes, it can also be really beautiful, and I highly recommend it. And finally, I would like to recommend my friends in the band Lucy Leave. I've spoken about them recently because their new album came out a couple of months ago, and I did some guest vocals on that album and co-wrote one of the songs with Mike from the band. But yeah, they're a great band. Their recent album is their 4th album, I think, or is it 3rd? I've lost track. But yeah, great kind of very eclectic sound, but heavily influenced by the kind of DIY punk thing, like the Minutemen. If you're a fan of the Minutemen, then you'll definitely want to check out Lucy Leave. But they're influenced by stuff from all over the place, and it all kind of comes together into something that is uniquely them. And yeah, I love it. Question 5 is there a novel/poem you have read that you believe captures the beauty and transformative power of music? What about non-fiction? In short, no, not really. I think that music speaks to me in a way that transcends or sidesteps language. And as much as I love language as well, I mean, I do make booktube videos, so of course I love language. But music, I think, Yeah, it circumvents language and touches me in a way that is deeper and more immediate and kind of impossible to put words to. What does music even mean? It what does a note or a chord or a rhythm mean? It means itself, and it stirs me in a way that I've never found the language that equals it. So yeah, in short, no, not really, but I do love this quote from Tom Waits, who is a fantastic songwriter, and he once said, "Songs are really just interesting things to be doing with the air." That said, I do have some non-fiction recommendations if you'd like to know more about particular areas of music. I recently read Ian Leslie's book, John and Paul, A Love Story in Songs, which is all about the relationship, the friendship between John Lennon and Paul McCartney of the Beatles. And I thought that was fascinating. If you're interested in the Beatles and you're not already kind of saturated by Beatles-related literature, then I highly recommend that book. Another couple of books that it's been more than a decade since I read them, so the specifics are now like fuzzy in my mind. But I really loved Our Band Could Be Your Life by Michael Azerrad. I hope I'm pronouncing his name right. But that is a book that covers the American independent punk scene in the 80s, 81 to 91. So the kind of the period between the original punk and the rise of grunge. So it covers bands like Minutemen, Mission of Burma, Minor Threat, Husker Du, Sonic Youth, Fugazi. And yet, if you're interested in any of those sorts of bands, or just kind of what the scene was like, what youth culture was like in the 80s, and kind of what it's like to be in a band, that's a really great book. And also, I highly recommend, for a more highbrow approach to music, The Rest Is Noise by Alex Ross. The Rest Is Noise, Listening to the 20th Century. It's the full title. And it's a really detailed and fascinating overview of the development of music throughout the 20th century. So the focus is generally on classical music, art music. But, it covers a lot of other stuff too, bits of jazz and all sorts of stuff. But, I found that really enlightening, and I feel like I learned a lot, and I was introduced to a lot of classical music that has come to mean a lot to me. So that's definitely a great way into certainly 20th century classical music. Question 6 is, who is a musician that everyone seems to love, but you just can't stand or understand the appeal of? You are limited to 3. The more hateful, the better. Well, I have to say, even if certain music leaves me cold or even outright irritates me, I prefer not to hate any musicians, or at least not hate them for their music. I might hate some of the things that they've done or said or stand for, but in terms of just the music that they made, I don't know, if it brings people joy, who am I to judge, really? And I know that some of the music that I love or some of the music I make might not bring people joy. So So yeah, it's kind of not really for me to hate on anyone for the terrible crime of making music that doesn't do anything for me. That said, there are artists that I just don't get or don't enjoy. I could easily say that I don't like the music of ABBA in the slightest. But even then, I can see why other people do. It's very well crafted pop music. There's loads of hooks. It's very memorable. I know some of those songs by heart, even though I don't like them. So of course they're massively popular. I just don't enjoy listening to them. But even then, I'm still kind of glad they exist because one of my favourite jazz groups, the band Plus, did a version of Knowing Me, Knowing You, which was the first thing I heard by them. And I love that, partly because it kind of sounds like they're almost destroying the song out of spite. So maybe that's why it appealed to me. But yeah, even with artists that I don't like, there can still be some kind of fringe benefits to their existence. So yeah, I'm not going to hate ABBA, even though I really don't enjoy their music. Question 7 is, which is more important to the song, the music/melody or the lyrics? Well, for me, it has to be the music, pretty much unquestionably. I mean, I never say I'm going to stick on some lyrics. I'm going to stick on some music. That's what I'm listening to. In fact, there's this great quote from Peter Gabriel, where he said, "There have been really great songs with appalling lyrics, but there have been no great songs with really appalling music." I find it hard to disagree with that, frankly. I think he does go on to say that if you were writing lyrics, you might as well try and make them good, which I also agree with. But yeah, I think that music is the unique component of music. It's hard to talk about the difference between music and lyrics when I'm using music to mean exclusively the melodic and harmonic component of the song, and also music as a whole, which includes the lyrics. But yeah, I mean, music is the essential ingredient. Lyrics, they can enhance and deepen a song. They can be memorable and meaningful and profound. But if it's attached to like music that I don't like, then I don't care how good the lyrics are. And equally, if I really love the music, the lyrics have to be really terrible for me to even notice that they're terrible. Now, James in his video did quite rightly say that it depends on the artist. I think different artists and different styles of music have different emphasis on music or lyrics. He pointed out like Woody Guthrie. His music is really a kind of vehicle for the lyrics. That's what's important to him. And if you're listening to Woody Guthrie or Bob Dylan, etc., and you're not paying attention to the lyrics, you're missing more than half the story. But for me, even artists with great lyrics, the music is still an essential component of that. I mean, some of my favourite lyricists include Tom Waits, who I've already mentioned, Randy Newman, Joni Mitchell, Billy Bragg, Andy Partridge from XTC. I think those are all really strong lyricists. but still the lyrics alone don't express the full meaning of the song. And also the way that the music and the lyrics can comment on each other, can even conflict with each other. I mean, take these lyrics. No one in the world ever gets what they want, and that is beautiful. Everybody dies frustrated and sad, and that is beautiful. Now, if you're not familiar with those lyrics, I'd like you to imagine what that song might sound like. What are you imagining? Are you imagining something slow and somber and mournful and sad and depressing? Now, if you are familiar with those lyrics, then you already know that's not the case, because it's from Don't Let's Start by They Might Be Giants. And if you look up that song and hear what that song sounds like, you'll see just what a divide there is between the literal meaning of the lyrics and the sound of the music. Question 8 is, what constitutes music versus noise? Where do you draw the line? Must music always have a melody, or can it take on other forms? Honestly, this is the question that made me really want to make this video, because I think I probably draw the line a lot closer to noise than most people, as you might have already guessed from me talking about Shudder to Think and Eric Dolphy. You know, a lot of my favourite music incorporates noise, sometimes gets overtaken by noise. I mean, probably my favourite band of all time is Cardiacs, and while sometimes they might sound quite melodic and pleasant and you know, agreeable, sometimes they sound like utter cacophony, but it's controlled and a deliberate cacophony, and I find it really invigorating and exciting and wonderful stuff. Also, recently I've been listening to a band called Breeze Glass, and they incorporate kind of field recordings and found sounds. You know, they would start by the band members playing instruments would record together in the studio, would kind of improvise some music, and then the band leader, Jim O'Rourke, would take those recordings and edit and manipulate them. And he would literally take a razor blade and cut up the tape and reassemble it and mess about with it. And he would include like the hum of a guitar amplifier, the crunching of a trash compactor, a radio blaring in a cafe, all kinds of stuff that you might think is non-musical, but it's assembled in such a way that it becomes musical, and it is, I think, very atmospheric, very evocative. You know, it almost sounds the way that a David Lynch film feels. I also love, you know, atonal classical music, avant-garde jazz I've already mentioned. Another of my favourite bands is Cheer Accident, and their album Enduring the American Dream starts with a track which is 6 minutes of organ drones and vacuum cleaner. And I think it's amazing. I think it's great. So yeah, I think, I mean, if you're going to take a very literal definition of noise as just unwanted sound, then noise can be even music that you personally don't like. I could categorize ABBA as noise, because when I hear it, I find it unwelcome. But you know, I think that music is vastly more than melody and harmony. It's a sensual experience. It's the texture of the sound, the timbre, the mood of it, and all of that can be expressed sometimes with noise. Another classical piece worth mentioning is 433 by John Cage, which is more of a thought experiment than a composition, really. I think it's often miscategorized as 4 minutes and 33 seconds of silence. That's not what it is. It's 4 minutes and 33 seconds of musicians not playing their instruments, and it invites the audience to listen to everything else that would have been masked by the sound of instruments. So the music becomes whatever else you can hear during those 4 minutes and 33 seconds. It becomes the sound of your body, of the person next to you breathing, someone in the distance coughing, traffic passing the auditorium, birds singing outside, whatever is going on. I mean, depending where you put on a performance of 433, it could be the sound of machine guns or riots or protests. It's inviting you to hear the whole world and your environment and reframe that as music. So, in a way, that is purely noise, but it's also very philosophical and very musical. So yeah, I think that traditional functional harmony, as you'd call it, pretty pleasant music, that's just one form of musical expression, and considering only that as music would be like only reading books where nothing bad ever happens, which you're perfectly welcome to do, but I wouldn't find that very exciting. So I think there's a place for dissonance and noise, for uncomfortable sounds and experimentation, because that is expressing more of the totality of human existence. So, I'm not saying pretty music is bad or vapid or pointless. I'm just saying that ugly, uncomfortable, dissonant, weird music is still music. You don't have to like it, but it is music. Question 9 is, if you were to introduce yourself to someone through sharing a playlist with them, what songs would be on that playlist? Well, I haven't made the playlist before recording this video, but I'll have a think about it and flash up a little playlist now. Editing Ali from the future here, and now that I've actually made the playlist, it's much longer than I was anticipating. In fact, there's 50 tracks on it, so I thought I would just talk you briefly through the rationale behind the playlist. So it starts with, I think, the most accessible and approachable stuff. So we've got the Beatles, the Kinks, Small Faces, some kind of folky singer-songwriter stuff like Simon and Garfunkel, Joni Mitchell, Nick Drake, Randy Newman, and then some kind of soul and funk like Curtis Mayfield, The Meters, and Prince. Then we move into a more Indian punk type sphere. So starting with Field Music, who I think are still very melodic, but slightly more kind of fiddly than the sort of pop stuff. XTC, Talking Heads, REM, Buzzcocks going full punk there, the Soft Boys, Television, Mission of Burma, Sonic Youth, Fugazi, Shellac, Slint, and Deerhoof. Then we move into some even more dissonant and experimental stuff. So, Shudder to Think, I've already spoken about just how dissonant and angular they can be. Cardiacs, I think one of the most in your face tracks in this whole list. We got The Residents, Can, Kraftwerk, Devo, Peter Gabriel, Kate Bush, Björk, Robert Wyatt, and Ivor Cutler. Then we move into some even more progressive and experimental stuff. So Gentle Giant, King Crimson, Henry Cow, Art Bears, Fred Frith, Captain Beefheart, Pere Ubu, and This Heat. And finally, we have a section of jazz music. There's Herbie Hancock, Miles Davis, John Coltrane, Charles Mingus, Eric Dolphy, Thelonious Monk, Ornette Coleman, and The Bad Plus. And at the very end, there is also 6 tracks of my own music. I can hardly make a playlist that supposedly introduces myself and leave off my own music. So there's 3 tracks by my band Bug Prentice and 3 solo tracks as well. I'll put the link to the playlist in the description of this video, or you can also find it through my YouTube profile. It's called The Sound of May list. And finally, question 10 is, music itself has no practical purpose. It does not cure diseases, feed or clothe you, or protect you from being attacked. So what is the purpose of music for humans? Why do you listen to music? Well, firstly, I would dispute a lot of these claims. I mean, if you're a professional musician, if you're paid to make music or paid to review music or any of the other things related to music, then it quite literally is feeding and clothing you. So yeah, I think that it can do that. I think it also has therapeutic value. I mean, music therapy exists; it's a thing. And for example, Alzheimer's patients are said to retain music and remember music long after a lot of their other memories have faded. So yeah, music definitely has therapeutic and therefore medical value as well. And I suppose in terms of protecting you from being attacked, I can think of at least one instance of someone whose life was saved by music, because Django Reinhardt, the jazz guitarist, should have ended up, I say should, I mean, obviously he absolutely should not have, but he was destined for the concentration camps during World War II, but one of the higher-ups was a fan of his music and managed to get him freed. So yeah, I would dispute all of these claims, but also I don't think music has to justify itself on a practical level like that. Yes, it does have practical benefits, but that's not what I love about music. Music exists and it justifies its own existence. But also, I do feel like music saved my life. As an anxious, depressed, and confused teenager, music gave me solace that I couldn't find anywhere else. It gave me community through like-minded friends who shared my taste in music and who made music with me. I listened to music as a form of solace and therapy, and a way to calm and soothe myself and my anxieties. Music spoke to me and still speaks to me in a deep way that goes beyond language and the things that I don't have words for. It speaks to deep, ancient parts of ourselves. It's believed that music predates language, and as I said earlier, for me it literally did predate language. I was singing before I was speaking. So music has really been a constant companion in my life, longer and more consistently than really anything else. So yeah, that's why I listen to music. It means that much to me. It means things that I can't express, and it expresses things that I can't express any other way. So yeah, music means a lot. The bit at the end. So that was the Sound of May tag. I'd love to hear in the comments if you have any thoughts on music, any favourite artists, or any answers to any of these questions, or any comments on all of the nonsense I've just been talking about. I will also put some of my own music at the end of this video, so if you'd like to hear some of that, then stay tuned. But that's about it from me today. I hope you're having a lovely day, and I will see you when I see you. Cheers.